We were brutally woken up by the very loud explosions outside, including close to our guest house. Very intense bombardments that continued for about 15 minutes. The moment that subsided a little bit, I could hear people shouting outside, screaming for help. I could hear ambulances driving off and on, the sirens of ambulances. And with every explosion, I could see the sky lighting up outside.
Mass death and terror are back in the Gaza Strip. This bleak picture that UNICEF's Rosalia Bolin describes brings back haunting images of Israel's devastating 15-month bombardment that up until this week was thought to be over. Or at least, that was the hope.
You hear the rumbling of plane, very ominous rumbling. You hear loud whistling of fighter jets. And so you know that bombs are about to be dropped. You just don't know when. You're waiting for the impact of the bombs. You don't know where, so you're wondering if it's going to be close to where you are or not.
It was late on a Tuesday night in the middle of Ramadan. Most children were likely asleep. That's when the Israeli army launched its fiercest bombing campaign on the Strip since a truce came into effect in January. In the span of mere hours, more than 400 people were killed, and at least 180 of them were children.
It's really heartbreaking. Children in Gaza are just worn out physically, mentally. They've lived through 15 months of unprecedented violence. They've spoken to me about being afraid of dying, being afraid that their parents would die, that their siblings would die.
And now, after 2 months of a truce that has once again come to a deadlock, Israel unilaterally ended the ceasefire. The attacks have not stopped. By Wednesday, the army resumed ground operations in the enclave. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the strikes were only the beginning and that future negotiations with Hamas, quote, will take place only under fire. The question on everyone's mind is, why has the war returned? And will it ever end in Gaza? This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. In this episode, we look at the impact on Palestinians in Gaza who had only just begun collecting the pieces of their shattered lives. We discuss Israel's motives and where the US stands, and we ask, is the ceasefire completely dead? New eviction orders once again have been issued for Gazans to leave areas in the north and the south of the Strip that Israel described now as combat zones. It was just weeks ago that displaced families had started returning to their homes en masse. Their brief respite is now over.
Some children over the past days and weeks have been asking me if I know whether the war was going to resume or if the ceasefire would last. And children always have had some hope that it would last. So it's absolutely heartbreaking that this hope is now completely shattered.
This comes after Israel had blocked aid from entering the Strip almost 2 weeks ago, making a humanitarian crisis there even worse. Several NGOs we have spoken to said they had distributed the aid as soon as it came in, meaning there are virtually no stockpiles of assistance. With the new casualties coming in faster now than they can be dealt with, morgues are full and trauma kits are running out in hospitals that already stand in ruin. Not a single piece of food, fuel, or water has entered the Strip since March 2nd.
This first and foremost impacts is the inability of injured children and injured adults to seek the medical care that they need. But the impact goes far beyond that. We have seen prices skyrocketing of goods. Some goods are now no longer available. For instance, fruit has disappeared off the market. And so families will struggle again to provide for their children.
It's so sad for Gazans because in a way, they were like in the process of breathing after 15 months of plausible genocide.
This is Taghreed Al-Khudari. She's a Palestinian analyst and journalist who used to live in Gaza.
And all of a sudden, this is back, and it's extremely devastating for them while trying to clean, to rebuild. I know a neighbor of my sister, a very nice lady. She was killed together with her daughter. She's 35, her daughter is 15. Killed again. We are back to that square, and the world is watching, and nobody's stopping Netanyahu. We are hostages now to Netanyahu.
The Israeli Prime Minister's office had instructed the military to strike Hamas with, quote, increasing military strength in its new campaign. Along with the US, Israel blamed the group for allegedly rejecting hostage deal proposals. Hamas denies this. But Taghreed says there's an underlying motive behind the new attacks.
It's very clear. The intention from day one of Netanyahu is it's the war, the continuation of war on Gaza. And it's serving, of course, his political ambition to avoid a court, to get a budget, to continue with being the prime minister. So it's blunt and it's clear. And this time it's with a green light with the Trump, which is extremely sad because Trump was like, he took the credit for the ceasefire and we gave him the credit. We didn't give it to Biden. But now it seems it's going somewhere else. Netanyahu was so mad, the special hostage envoy, Adam Buller, talking to Hamas directly. And it angered him because this special hostage envoy, Adam Buller, he not only spoke to the media, but also to the Israeli media. He exposed that the guy behind breaking the ceasefire with the continuation of the war is Netanyahu.
Israel had welcomed a controversial plan for Gaza proposed by US President Donald Trump, which would see the US take ownership of the Strip. It had been described as an effort to forcibly expel Palestinians from their homeland, reminiscent of the 1948 Nakba. The latest strikes and the choking of aid have also been condemned as attempts to put pressure on Gaza's civilian population as a form of collective punishment.
They are focusing on one thing, ethnic cleansing option. And it's becoming something that they really truly believe in. And it seems that Trump also is backing that. Netanyahu, in a few minutes, he killed all these people at once. For what? 6 Hamas guys they killed? But how many civilians, how many children, how many women? And what is the end? It's like, are they going to end Hamas? They are not going to end Hamas.
As part of the truce that mediators struck earlier this year, there was a phased release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian detainees held in Israeli prisons. But whether Hamas really planned to release all the remaining captives or not remained a point of contention.
Hamas was very clear, and when they met with Adam Buller, special hostage envoy, they agreed on 10 years truce. Of course, they wanted to release those hostages. I don't think they are interested to keep them. They are not, and they are blunt with saying, no, we will hand them over, we will release them. But at the end of the day, this is the only card that Hamas has. And what does it mean? But you have to end the war. You cannot just release the hostages for a few days of calm. The war has to end. Israeli military forces have to leave the Gaza Strip. And this is what every Palestinian wants inside Gaza. It's not Hamas who wants that. They want an end to this. It doesn't make any sense to continue that just for Netanyahu's political interest.
On Thursday, Hamas fired back at Israel in a rocket attack that was intercepted by Israeli forces. This came after the group indicated that it wanted the ceasefire to be reinstated. All eyes will now be watching to see if this means a return to the situation before the ceasefire or whether Hamas's response is limited.
Hamas is very interested in the ceasefire. They are very interested in that. And also, they are not interested in governing the place. They were clear on that. The only issue was getting rid of their arms. But this, I think it could have been done, but with talking, with dialogue. And of course, they understand that people want an end to this. Palestinians want an end to this because it's a great suffering that has no logic, that is going on. And they are paying hell of a price. Their lives are at stake. And of course, they want an end to this. And I assure you, Hamas also is interested in an end to this as well.
The question now is, amid the violence, will ceasefire talks return in earnest? Despite Israel's new military assault, Hamas said it won't shut the door on negotiations, but has also stated there is no need for new terms, that the original agreement will suffice. Sources have also told The National that Egypt, one of the mediators, is already making a push for talks with a hostage proposal in hand. But what happens next will largely depend on another mediator, the United States. Brian Katulis is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and host of MEI's podcast Taking the Edge Off the Middle East. I spoke to him about the U.S. stance on the breakdown of the ceasefire and about Trump's relationship with Netanyahu. The strikes that Israel started launching on Tuesday were green-lit by the U.S. administration even after it seemed that we were inching closer to a prolonged ceasefire. A U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff, was just in Qatar, as we know, and the UAE for meetings with Arab officials there. And everything seemed to be moving in the direction of a diplomatic end. So why is all of this now suddenly dead in the water? And how did these strikes resume with the approval of the US when we were so close to real progress?
I think what happened is the patient diplomacy that was required to get from phase one to phase two of this deal just did not exist on the Trump team. And there wasn't any effort at all to prevent Israel from abrogating this agreement, which had essentially said they weren't comfortable with key aspects of phase two, which would require the withdrawal of Israeli troops. The Israelis maybe never intended to get things to phase two in the agreement, and they wanted to renegotiate it. The Israelis decided to cut off humanitarian aid and electricity to Gaza as a pressure tactic, and the Trump team just backed it. And that probably shouldn't surprise anyone, because if you look at Trump's record in his first term, he exerted maximum pressure not only on Iran, but on the Palestinians themselves. And Trump has a propensity, as we see in the Ukraine war, a war that was begun by Russia invading Ukraine. He has an inclination to actually pressure the weaker parties in a conflict and to side with those who actually have more power and strength. You add to it also the fact that he signaled more arms shipments to Israel in the first few weeks of his second term, in the first 2 months here.
What is it about phase two, apart from the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, that Israel didn't want? And how can the US and Israel all of a sudden think that they can return the hostages militarily when they had failed to do that for so many months?
Phase one necessarily should have included more discussions about how to define phase two and actually the sequencing, because this is very important. What's the sequencing of how Israeli troops are withdrawn, and then what comes in after that? And there was vague discussions about Palestinian forces or Arab forces, some offers, but it was never really, the details were never really agreed upon. But the important thing here is that the Israeli government did not want to start that conversation in phase one. And this, I think, is linked to Netanyahu and his own political difficulties here. He's got a very extremist right-wing government. He has members of his initial government that left, in part because some of those team members wanted there to be more war in Gaza. And those extremists on the right got what they wanted in this attack. And Ben-Gvir returned, and he's back in. So it's, I think, very much directly linked to Netanyahu's weak position in an Israeli system that has shifted even further rightward. But anyone in the Arab world who thinks that the Netanyahu government is likely to produce the two-state solution or a pathway to support Palestinians, I think they're deluding themselves in thinking that this current Israeli government actually is interested in anything more than continuing the conflict. And there's certainly, the trend is in the opposite direction, hints of annexation of the West Bank and other things.
Do you think that the Trump-Netanyahu relationship is similar to the Biden-Netanyahu relationship, which we saw Biden sort of losing sway over Netanyahu? Or do you think that the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu is more in lockstep with each other in terms of what happens next?
I think they're very much in lockstep. If you look beyond sort of Israel's action to end the ceasefire earlier this week, there was a simultaneous action by the United States against the Houthis in Yemen. And there's also hints that the United States and Israel might coordinate additional actions against Iran above and beyond what happened in the two strikes last year in April and May. So even though Biden did very little to exercise U.S. leverage against Israel, he did hold back delivery of certain weapon systems. They did have tough conversations publicly and privately with Netanyahu. You're not going to see any of that from Donald Trump. That's my prediction. Donald Trump has nominated Mike Huckabee to be his ambassador to Israel, who essentially says the Palestinian people do not exist, who does not believe in the two-state solution. So I think Trump is much, much closer. He's writing a bigger blank check for Israel. And I see no indication that he'll move away from that, in part because I don't think he fundamentally cares that much about the people of the Middle East. I think he cares about the prospect of getting a Nobel Peace Prize, which he won't get if he can't have a more balanced approach on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. But does he care about the peace and prosperity and dignity at a deep level of the Palestinian people? No, there's no indication that he does.
At the same time, we are seeing some sort of efforts to resume talks, at least by the Egyptian and Qatari mediators. But do you think these talks will actually amount to anything? Or Is the prospect of ending the war diplomatically now over? And are these talks just for show? Do you think that we're just moving in a direction where military action takes place by Israel and the annihilation of Gaza is basically imminent?
There are parts of Israel that would like to continue its campaign. There are many in the Trump administration that would just give that blank check. But the big block and break from all of this are A, the Palestinian people themselves. They're not willing to move. B, Israelis who actually oppose their own government. There are many people who, inside of the Israeli political system, ordinary Israelis who want peace and coexistence. And then most importantly are those powers in the Middle East who actually I think could step up more and more forcefully to prevent this from all happening. But that would mean speaking in a way that produces gaps between their countries and the United States. But what we've seen over the last 10 years are countries in the region, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and others, showing that they have agency on many different files, that they can actually shape events to their benefit. And in this case, showing a much more unified show of support for the Palestinian people, I think is necessary and urgent, in part because you've got an Israeli government that wants to move in the opposite direction, and you've got a Trump administration that does not seem to be terribly interested in helping resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a way that's just and sustainable.
That's it for Beyond the Headlines. Follow the latest developments on Israel's war in Gaza and beyond on thenationalnews.com. This episode was produced by Ban Barqawi and audio engineered by Arthur Edison. Yasmin Al-Taji is our assistant producer and Dua Farid is our editor, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. Thank you for listening.